Hello, my name's Dawn Dickens and I'm the Education Officer at the Manx Wildlife Trust. And today we've come down to Port Mooar again, and as you can see it's low water, and we're going to be looking at what lives on our shoreline. And today we're going to concentrate on something that you're probably all very familiar with, but we're just going to find out a little bit more about it. So come with me on a journey down on the beach.
So what we come to find is a mast of disguise on this shore, and part of its strategy for living here is it's so well camouflaged. Can you see this thing just moving here? We have a little closer look, and I pull back the weed there. Don't know if you can make out because the water's a bit murky, but we've actually got a little crab hiding in here. I'm just going to pick it up. Here we go. There we go, there it is. I'm just going to pop it in our bucket so we can have a little look at it later.
So the last crab we found was actually in a rock pool, but they're so good at adapting for life on the seashore that they can survive when the tide's out. And if we look, I've just lifted up this huge stone here, and if we look right down at the bottom, I don't know if you can make it out, just tucked right in there, see the mottled shell. We've got another crab just hiding here, and this is very much a survival strategy they have to hide under stones to keep themselves nice and damp, so they can keep breathing and keep their bodies moist and they don't dry out. So just lift up some of these bigger stones on the beach and you will find them. They don't need to be in rock pools, but please always replace the stones afterwards where you find them exactly the same way down, and do be careful of your fingertips.
And I just wanted to show you this is a very typical sort of aggressive defensive stance. So if I just come around the crab, I might make a runner for it. Here you go. You can see that it's there, ready with its claws, ready to get hold of you basically and protect itself. So this is usually a very defensive position, and it's giving itself room to move its claws around. Now when everyone goes rock pooling, they are absolutely desperate. They really want to find a crab. And there's certain ways that you should pick them up. You should always treat them very gently. A lot of people are very scared of them because they have claws, but you know, we're so much bigger than they are that they're just frightened and they're just trying to protect themselves. So as a general rule, when I find a crab, I have a look and I measure it against the distance of my thumb. There we go. So if from that distance there to that my knuckle, okay, from the tip of my thumb to my knuckle, if the crab is smaller than that, do you know what? Just pick it up in your hand. It's not going to hurt you. It's not strong enough to hurt you, okay? Just be very gentle with them. I know a lot of people get a bit frightened. There you are, he's going for a bit of a walk now. So hold them low over your tray, because they will, like that, just suddenly drop off your hand. Now this one in the corner, if I hold my thumb near to it, you can see it's much bigger. The only safe way to pick up a crab so you don't get nipped is actually across the shell, across the carapace, remember? Okay, so I've picked it up, I've tucked my thumb just near to the claws so she can't reach back and get me, okay? So that's safe. My fingernail, can you see the shell is tucked up inside my fingernail. Now a lot of people, I'll just pop it back down, think it's safe to put your thumb underneath and your finger on the top and pick them up that way. You will end up with a nip that way because they can't articulate, that's move their claws so that they can nip you. And talking about moving legs, everyone knows a crab moves sideways. Well, here you can see they are quite capable of moving forward and backwards, but the fastest way that they can move is sideways, and it's to do with the joints on their legs and their exoskeleton. Now, we were talking about exoskeletons, and off on the beach, I'll come down here, you will find plenty of empty shells like this. The trouble is, if you have a hard exoskeleton, when you grow, your shell does not grow with you.
So crabs have to molt, and how they do it is absolutely amazing. A shore crab, it takes 10 molts, so 10 changes of shell, to reach 20 millimeters within their first year. So that's a lot of changes. Okay, so how do they do it? Well, first of all, their bodies are hung on their shell, so that means all the lungs, everything, are placed on their shells. We'll just scan up so you can have a little look at the crabs moving here. And so the first thing they have to do, they send a chemical out and they detach their body literally from the inside of their shell. The next thing they do, shore crabs will then swell themselves up with water, okay, and they increase in size by 20 to 30% of their body size. They'll swell up by, and as they do this, they'll actually crack. If we go back down and have a look at the shell, okay, you can see this one is a molt because it's gone around the weak point, okay, of the shell. So it literally just pops out. The crab then is very, very vulnerable because the shell underneath hasn't hardened off. It's still very, very soft. People call them soft crabs or maybe peeler crabs at this stage. And it does take them about 2 or 3 days to harden off completely. Now, there's quite a high mortality rate in this because if something goes wrong, if the shell doesn't harden off, then they're more vulnerable to predators. If they get stuck at some point with the shell, then because it's quite a complex process, they actually have to pull their legs and their claws out. Then there's quite a high mortality rate with those. This looks a bit grim, but I'm going to show you a crab that's died, and we're just going to have a little look at the inside of it. Now, the thing that's really, really interesting here, these darker areas here that I'm just pointing to are actually the lungs, okay? They're what we call the gills, and people sometimes call them dead man's fingers. And if people eat crabs, this is the part you really, really don't want to eat. They make people very, very poorly. This crab has probably died from predation, I would imagine. You can tell if you pick up a shell and it's got a holes in it, then that crab will probably have been predated. Stop. This crab here is a shore crab. All the crabs that I've shown you up to now are shore crabs. How can you tell? Well, can you see where my finger is? From the eye socket, the eye here, all the way back, there are like these zigzag lines. Oops, the female's just trying to get out here. She's, got her. And there's 5 of them. So from the eye to the edge, from the eye to the edge of the shell, there are these 5 zigzags. Can you see as well the indentation on the shell here? There's 2, almost like arches, and often they've got little spots on as well. Okay, so this is a shore crab, and it's got this, the body's got this typical sort of wedge shape to it as well. Can you see? Just here, all right? Just here and here. Okay, so these very, very common, our most common crab, this shore crab, the common shore crab it's called as well. Okay, so as we've got the crabs in the bucket here, I just thought I'd tell you a little bit more about crabs and how they're adapted to living in the seashore. Just try and make sure that I can still see some of them. They come from the family crustaceans, and they are decapods. They actually have 10 legs. So in a minute, when we take one of these crabs out to have a good look at it, we'll count up the legs. In fact, we might be able to do it just here on this one. So you can see quite clearly on this bigger one, specimen here, we've got 4 legs, and then the front 2 legs are actually adapted into pincers, into claws. They're actually adapted legs. So they do have 10 legs, and they're decapods. They're omnivores. They will eat seaweed, and they will eat shrimps, and even other crabs. They are cannibalistic. They're invertebrates. so they don't have a backbone, but they have this lovely hard exoskeleton. This is part of their survival strategy, that they this shell protects them from their predators such as gulls and things. The shell is actually what we call a mineralized chitin. So chitin is a bit like your fingernails and your hair, but this is a bit harder than that. It's not like a calcified shell. And their whole life cycle is that they will mate, and the female carries around some eggs. Now I have noticed that I have got a female with some eggs, so we'll have a little closer look at her. And when these eggs hatch, the female carries about 200,000 eggs with her, but the survival rate is very, very low. And these eggs are released in the water, and they become zooplankton, and they are absolutely amazing. So this is a typical shore crab larval form, and you can see this massive spike here as a form of protection. And you can see how they're related to lobsters. See how this long abdomen, the long tail coming down here, okay? And that will happen. What will happen is when this becomes benthic, which means when it settles on the seafloor, this actually becomes shorter and tucks right up underneath the crab, but it is still there. So we're going to have a look at the anatomy of crabs. So the main part of the shell, the carapace, okay, or it could be called cephalothorax as well, okay? This is hard and offers some protection. If you look, can you see here that when my fingers are pointing, there's two little eyes on stalks. These are compound eyes, and you can see these slightly longer antennae, two of them pointing up here. The antennae actually have glands at the base of them that help them cope with the salinity of the water. So if it was in a rock pool on a really hot day, the water would start to evaporate. So the salt content of the water, the salinity, would start rising. And these little glands help them cope with that. You can also see the legs here, and we've also got a claw just tucked away here. I'm going to just flip it over, and I'll be able to tell you whether it's male or female. Okay. So this is a male shore crab because it's the darker bit on its belly is actually its tail. Its tail's held really up close to its body, and because it's a triangle shape, that one is a male crab. That's its abdomen you're looking at. Now what's really, really interesting in this crab, if you can see, it's lost quite a few of its legs. It's only got one on this side, and it's got three on the other side. It's also missing a claw. It's only got one on the side that I'm pointing to. Now, what happens here is crabs have the ability to grow back these limbs. It takes them about a year, and they start budding really when it starts to molt. And budding means start to grow. Okay, so it's quite capable of regenerating those limbs. It is a disadvantage, obviously, not having the claws, because the claws help it to feed. Because it doesn't have teeth like we do when we eat, it uses its claws to break up the food and pass it into its mouth parts. So right at the top of the mouth parts, just underneath the eyes, you can see, if I just turn it over, okay, they're really, really quite complex. There's parts that move to the side and parts that move up and down. Okay, so I'm just going to pick up another crab just here. If I can, she's going through a run. And the interesting thing about this one is, if I turn her over, there, can you see that orange mass? They're actually all her eggs. And now if I turn her over, can you see, you can see the abdomen now holding on to that egg mass. They're sort of stuck together as well. She can't just hold it on with her abdomen. So they're stuck together. So there's quite a lot. Just remember, we said about 200,000 eggs all tucked in there. Okay, so I'm going to see if I can find another female crab so we can have a closer look at that abdomen, and you can see that it's rounded and broader than the male one. So this is another female,
you can see the tail that's tucked down, okay. It does look dark, but don't go on colour alone. Yeah, she's beginning to wake up a bit and want to get away. You can see that that tail is so much more broader than the male we were looking at, and it's more rounded looking too.
So there was one more crab that I wanted to show you, but I didn't find at all when I went out. And this is the one. Now, when you're looking, you find crabs on the seashore. This one you really, really want to avoid at all costs. This is called a red velvet swimming crab. And if you look, the eyes are very, very red coloured. Now, these are particularly aggressive crabs. I don't like to pick them up at all. In fact, I won't. I had one jump out of a bucket at me once, and it wasn't a very nice surprise, really. So if you ever see this crab, it really isn't worth picking up. It's just too aggressive. But the other interesting thing about this is you can see the back legs are very flattened, and they're used as paddles for swimming. And these stripes on the back leg are a giveaway as well. So you need to look for the red eyes and the stripy back legs. And you'll know you've got a red velvet swimming crab, and it's not a good idea to touch it. I just thought it'd be a good idea to sort of round this up now and just talk again about the adaptation to marine life for crabs. So to live on the seashore is really quite a rough environment. You've got the tidal waves coming in, you've got the seawater sometimes there and sometimes it isn't. It can get very hot, it can get very cold. Okay, so to cope with that, they have crabs have developed strategies, and one of them is that they will hide under stones, and this helps keep them damp. They have this nice hard exoskeleton shell that protects them from predators and also from damage from if they get bashed against rocks with the wave actions. They have these wonderful claws here which they can manipulate, that's carry their food to their mouths, but they can also use this as a form of defence. Their coloration is such that they're often very well camouflaged. Now, the tiny little shore crabs will often be white in colour. They vary so much. And the white ones are usually found where you get shingle and sand, and they tend to match that colour. And their eyes as well. Their eyes are on stalks so that they can fold them flat. This also helps when they bury themselves in the sand because they can see out at night.